Hey everyone, thanks for joining me again. Today we're going to be painting a mountain meadow scenic painting. It's always a struggle. But basically I'm going to be wetting down my paper first off, and this is the wet on wet technique. So I pre-wet my sky area with lots of water. I don't want it to pool on my paper, but I am putting down water first, and then I'm going to take shades of purple, orange, and red and mix them into that sky wherever that wet is, and you'll see the paint kind of take on wherever those wet areas are, but I am leaving some spaces white, as you can see up there, for other colors to fit in. So you don't want to do like one huge shade of purple, because then it would be hard to put other colors over the top of it. So I am leaving space for like oranges and yellows, and just working it in while my canvas still is wet. I am using Arch's 140-pound watercolor paper, and that holds water and color really well. So if you're using cheaper papers, using wet on wet is going to be a little bit more tricky, because the water won't be absorbed on the paper. It'll be more just sitting on the surface. I have left some empty spaces for my foreground, and there's a little tree up there where you can see a little white space that I'm going to fill in later. So I'm not painting over that with any water or color, and we're going to come back through with that. But wet on wet's really great for clouds, because it will kind of blend those colors together and make these beautiful soft clouds, instead of having to like manually paint them in and block in shapes and stuff. But you can always come back and add in more detail later once this layer is dry, so keep that in mind. But it is a fun, simple technique for getting great clouds. Now we're going to move on to the foreground, which is going to be mixtures of green and yellow. And I'm going to start with kind of the mid-tones. I don't want to start with the darkest colors first, because it's hard to reverse that with watercolor. Any other painting medium, you will kind of want to start with, you can kind of start wherever you want with like oil and acrylic. But for watercolor, you want to reverse the process and start lighter and go darker. Otherwise, it's going to be really hard to reverse things as you progress in your painting. So I'm starting off with kind of a mid-tone green, laying it down, and I'm just going to work that around, keeping sure to add more texture in by using more paint on the brush, less water, and that gives it more of a textured look instead of just blocks of color. And you work this up over time. You can spend as much time on this as you want, or as little time on this as you want, but the general idea is laying down some base colors, lights and mid-tones and stuff like that, and we'll come back over it later with more detail and stuff like that. I am planning out kind of different shades of colors. It's not just all green. I'm adding in like browns and yellows and stuff like that to make it fit in the more sunsetty area, and then building up as I go. But it is more planned out than just a big blot of green. I also have a little path in there that I'm not painting over, as you can see. I'm going to leave that white so I can make a little path in there, which will be brown and kind of orangish brown to fit the color of the sunset. But I'm doing all this as my sky is drying, so I can come back after this layer is kind of set and work on the sky while this layer is drying. And so you can kind of split your painting into different parts and work on them as one different part is drying. And that's a huge benefit of working with watercolor, is the speed at which you can work, where other mediums like oil will take forever. But right now we're going to work on that little tree where that white space was. I'm just adding in little dots of green, not filling it all in as one big block of green, but more just little dots so that we can have the sky kind of poke through it. And then I'm going to come back through and just add in a little bit more dark color in that grass back in the background. But now, since that sky layer is a little bit more dry, we can come back through with darker colors and start to build up that tone and contrast, and then also adding in more shapes to it. So using kind of the edge of my brush and following similar patterns with my brush strokes. So I'm not going to use like horizontal lines with vertical lines in the same area, because that would look weird. You're trying to keep consistent brush strokes. And as the clouds go back further in the horizon line, to make them appear as if they're moving away from us, you use like the edge of your brush to create super thin lines like you're seeing right there. And that creates the illusion that the clouds are going further and further away from you. I'm also adding in the clouds in that white space of the tree to fill it in, and then bringing back in more yellows. This is basically just building up your contrast of your sky and making it pop. Now we're coming back through because our foreground is a little bit more dry, and we're gonna start building up more tones and contrast and texture in preparation for our pen layer, which will come through at the very end. But I'm also adding in that base color for the path, which is just a light brown, not starting off too dark, like I said, but now we're gonna come back through and start adding in more contrast for their existing layers, as you'll see here. Adding in more texture as well as I go with a drier brush, trying to add in some little grass strands with just the edge of the brush and a darker green, which to achieve darker colors, if you mix brown and blue, you'll get almost a black gray, and then you can add that to like your greens to really tone it down and make it more earthy and contrasting. Never add just pure black to your colors because that'll really dull it down, but you can kind of control how much you're using if you use the brown and blue technique. So this is where I start to kind of introduce pen into this piece with that tree, especially because that's a very contrasting tree back there. So I'm using Pentalic pens to kind of go over the stuff in the background to really make it pop, and I'm going to do that with the horizon line as well. I'm not going to keep it a very harsh straight line. I'm going to kind of break it up so it's not just one continuous line, and then adding in some little details back there. And then I'm going to continue this later on in the piece in the foreground as well, as you'll see coming up. Coming back through with some dark green, we're gonna add, to get that super dark green, I'm adding green, blue, and brown, like I said before, to really darken it. And you can adjust the browns and the blues to your liking for that green to either make it as light as you want or as dark as you want. So just mess around with it, mess around with tones, but there is a lot more contrast in the sunset piece, so make sure you are getting adequate contrast in your foreground. Now we are going to start working on that horizon line a little bit more and bringing in more contrast for this layer. Now it's a little bit more dry and really building in that background contrast to make our picture pop. So for this next technique, you can use whatever you want. You can use a knife, a razor blade. I ended up using a screwdriver because it was close by, but you're using the edge of this to kind of scrape away the paint and the paper. You're not trying to go all the way through the paper, but you are trying to pull off some of the existing layer to reveal the white layer underneath, and that can give this nice white highlight to a lot of your painting. So mess around with this. You don't want to go too hard. Like I said, you don't want to cut through the paper, but you want to scrape off that upper layer. And that can bring some more contrast in, especially in with the sky. Because with watercolor, it's hard to keep white spaces And so to bring back in more of the highlight separation from the shadows, this is a great technique to do it. Just be careful that you don't rip your paper, but you'll see it in the sky that you can really add some more definition to the sun bleed through in these clouds, and it really gives it a nice, beautiful, huge contrast look. But now we're gonna come back through with our Pentalic pen and add in final details. You can do as much as you want or as little as you want, but I just really adore this technique, and that kind of finishes this painting off for me. But thank you so much for watching and supporting this channel. I love seeing new people in and a lot of new faces around. So please continue to watch. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next video. Thank you so much.